This evening, the countdown to see who Kamala Harris' new VP is on. Will Mark Kelly make the cut? The primary election ended with some shocking results. What does this mean about what voters want with their newly elected nominees? How will this affect the projections for the general election? Plus, Kamala Harris and J.D. Vance are making their first visits to Arizona since their nomination. Will these have an effect on Arizona voters? This is Before You Vote. Welcome, I'm Mike Broomhead. The biggest news in Arizona, the results of the primary election from last Tuesday. We're taking a deep dive into those results with political pollster Mike Noble from Noble Predictive Insights on today's show. But first, with everything going on in the news, let's get caught up with some of the latest headlines, both locally and nationally. Let's start with J.D. Vance rally here in the Valley. He was in Phoenix, Arizona for a big rally, and then the next day went down for a border visit and had a press conference at the border. Now, next week, the vice president will be here with her new running mate that will be announced next week. What's interesting about this is it shows you, with both of them being here, that Arizona is going to play a critical role in the election. And I imagine we're going to see the candidates and the running mates in Arizona a lot between now and November. Also, President Biden wants term limits for U.S. Supreme Court justices. He also wants a code of conduct. The difficulty here is this. If you have term limits, how does it get enforced? When does it take action? It would allow a president every 2 years in office to name a new Supreme Court justice, or at least nominate one. But here's the problem. The separation of powers with a code of conduct. Who enforces it without violating that? It sounds more like a campaign ploy than it does a realistic change. And all it is about the makeup of the court they're saying is too conservative right now. We'll see. I think in the long run, the system stays exactly like it is. Now let's talk about something local. And I want to read this quote. This is Governor Hobbs talking about the election in November. She said Arizonans will get to choose between allowing insurrectionists, white supremacists, and indicted fake electors to continue to control the legislature, or Democratic candidates who are focused on lowering everyday costs for Arizonans. That was a big shot she took on social media, but it also shows how much the governor wants to flip at least one chamber of our state legislature, meaning either the House or the Senate right now has a one-seat majority in each chamber for the Republicans. Can one or both flip? And that is a big effort by the governor trying to make that happen with that statement. Will it backfire on her with voters, or will that be what motivates voters on her side of the aisle to flip one or both of those chambers? Some of the interesting things that are happening here. Now, stick around. We're taking a look at the most consequential results of the Arizona primary election from last week with polling analyst Mike Noble. We'll be back here in exactly 60 seconds. Welcome back to Before You Vote. Joining us to kind of recap what we've seen and wrap our arms around it is Mike Noble from Noble Predictive Insights. Listen, I know it's been a rough few days for you and you're having trouble with your voice. I appreciate even doing this.
You can hear it. I did about 24 interviews in the last few days, and Arizona's clearly the center of the political universe.
And you are clearly at the center of those poll numbers. First of all, the numbers came in solid with where you predicted they were going to be.
Yeah, no, it was interesting. So we had our final poll of record. We did Utah, Nevada, but then finished up with Arizona, and we were spot on with where we thought the U.S. Senate race would go. So we felt pretty good about the results.
So let's start there. Let's start with the Senate race. The concern for a lot of people in the Republican Party is that it needed to be even bigger than it was. Do you think? What did you learn from those numbers being where they were? You saw how the numbers are, but what do they tell you?
I kind of agree with what people have been saying about it, but not really. And here's why: is that they were saying the same line about Trump and Nikki Haley in the presidential contest, but as you can see, Republicans are fully unified around Donald Trump right now. So I don't buy as much into that number there. I think the issues have been there for a while. The biggest problem with Lake right now is that she has a very high name ID, but she's very defined, but in a negative way, and mainly among independent voters and moderate Republicans. So kind of that McCain wing of the party. She hasn't quite shored that up yet. And so I think the issue she has right now There's that, and then also she has a big money disadvantage in that race, being 4-1. Because at the end of the day, whether you win by 15 points or one vote, a win is a win. And what are those Republicans? Are they going to vote for the Democrat or sit out? I mean, a lot of them will come home. So, but the issues are still there for Kari Lake.
Well, Karen Taylor Robson came out, gave her an endorsement, and now you know that Sheriff Lamb is probably going to do the same. If they advocate for her, does that help win over that McCain? Does that help get her over the hump with those other voters?
Theoretically, yes. But the thing is, we'll see. Frankly, we'll know in the polling in the next month or so if those folks start to come home. We're starting the right steps right now with Karen Taylor Robson or Lamb or others kind of coalescing around Lake. Frankly, they have to, because if they don't, Kari Lake's odds then are quite slim if she has a fractured party going into November against Ruben Gallego.
What do you make of the race for sheriff? On the Republican side, I wasn't necessarily surprised to see that Sheridan won, but that was a huge margin for him. But also Tyler Camp being the incumbent and the acting sheriff. What do you make of this race?
Well, not only did Camp beat the acting sheriff, he also had some issues going on prior to that in the race. So I think beating the Democrats' holdover, I think was a surprise, frankly, to me. So Camp will be one to watch, but Sheridan, I think that was also a surprise too to see him winning because he's come from that Arpaio old guard. We thought that was kind of done with in the party, but I think the resurgence of this populist MAGA crowd, I think, is probably where Sheridan has benefited of kind of going back to those hardline policies that the Republicans are kind of now embracing compared to the party of old.
Okay, so that's a great segue into the county recorder's race. Stephen Richer loses in the primary to Heap, but now does that give the advantage to the Democrat moving forward? Because it's going to be a tough sell to get those richer voters to vote for Heap.
Correct. If you're just looking at is this seat in the red column or blue column, yes, Richer lost, but I think that's going to make this a big challenge for Republicans. One is the Democrats are going to raise a significant amount of money due to Heap's position on the elections compared to Richer. They see Heap as more of a threat than Richer was. So you're going to have a big money disparity, but also I think Democrats have a really good shot at taking this seat because we know roughly three quarters of independent voters don't believe the election was stolen, and about 20% or so of Republicans, like that moderate wing. So it's just a really tough issue for Republicans, and that's why electorally they should probably stay away from it. But Republicans, I think, are going to put this seat in jeopardy. That's currently in their column, but Dems have a great opportunity to flip this back.
So when you look at some of the districts that are kind of all over the place, CD1, Schweikert won handily, but Ansari is going to be, Ahmed Shah is going to be a tough opponent. But you also look at things like in 4, Greg Stanton's district. Is that up for grabs, or do you think those 2 seats are safe with those 1 Republican, 1 Democrat?
Correct. So when you look at Congressional District 8, you look at Congressional District 3, or if you look at Stan's district, District 4, is that you see that the other sides can run, but they're incredibly safe seats. I mean, yes, they have a chance, but think of the scene from Dumb and Dumber. Like, what are my chances? 1 out of 10 or
1 in a million?
Yeah. So you're saying there's a chance,
right?
I mean, that's kind of the deal there. I mean, you basically have to have an act of God event to happen to that incumbent, frankly, for them to lose in those pretty safe districts. And remember, CD4, especially Stanton, what's in his district? Arizona State University. I mean, universities are incredibly, I see that very tough to see how they flip those.
Always appreciate the insight, and I look forward to talking to you as we get closer to November.
Yeah, don't worry, I'm going to get it back one day.
I thank you. All right, that's Mike Noble. We'll be right back. Now, don't go anywhere. It's the latest updates on the presidential campaign trail. From the attacks on race to questions about the record. Find out how the presidential election is heating up. This is Before You Vote.
Former President Trump sat down for a discussion at the annual meeting of the National Association of Black Journalists, and he used the moment to go after his opponent's race.
She was always of Indian heritage, and she was only promoting Indian heritage. I didn't know she was black until a number of years ago when she happened to turn black, and now she wants to be known as black.
Just hours later, while addressing a historically black sorority in Texas, Vice President Harris responded.
It was the same old show. The divisiveness and the disrespect. And let me just say, the American people deserve better.
And she emphasized unity.
Our differences do not divide us. They are an essential source of our strength.
But on the campaign trail in Arizona, Republican VP nominee Senator J.D. Vance doubled down on the Trump team attacks.
Kamala Harris is a phony who caters to whatever audience is in front of her.
The candidates are also drawing sharp contrasts on their positions, with Vice President Harris calling the Trump agenda extreme.
America has tried these failed policies before, and we are not going back.
But former President Trump argues his record is better than his rivals.
Well, Kamala, let's go. Challenge accepted. Are you ready? Let's compare our record.
With less than 100 days until the election, each candidate is laying out a very different vision.
And we in this room are fighting for the future.
If she becomes your president, our country is finished.
Today, the Democratic National Committee will begin its virtual roll call vote, where delegates are expected to officially choose VP Harris as the party's nominee. In Washington, I'm Hannah Brandt.
Now, it's still up in the air when the debate between Trump and Harris will take place, but both candidates have agreed to participate. Before the debate, there's still more news to come from the presidential campaigns, including the Harris pick for vice presidential nominee.
I voted for him. I think he's a good Democrat. He really does try to work with both sides.
In the key battleground of Maricopa County, Arizona, plenty of positive opinions about Senator Mark Kelly, but it's also not hard to find Kelly critics.
I've lived here my whole life. I just don't feel that Mark Kelly is good for Arizona, good as a vice president.
Arizona narrowly tipped in favor of Joe Biden in 2020, a result many here still don't buy, despite no evidence of widespread voter fraud.
I think it came out differently than a lot of people thought, and it just sort of represents the divide in the country.
For those Arizonans, 2024 is about righting what they believe is a wrong.
Arizona deserves a real solution to this problem at the border. This has been a problem that Washington has failed on for decades now.
As a border state senator, Kelly pushed President Biden for more construction of the border wall. His understanding of immigration could offset what's viewed as a major weakness for Kamala Harris. Kelly is the son of 2 New Jersey police officers, and his experience as a Navy combat pilot and NASA astronaut could also appeal to veterans, law enforcement, and older voters.
I think he could possibly get a lot of the, some of the veteran vote. And Arizona is a swing state, so a lot of the voters that voted for him in Arizona could potentially vote for Vice President Harris.
Voter registration data confirms Arizona's swing state status. While registered Republicans outnumber Democrats by almost 200,000, nearly 30% of voters here have no party affiliation. Supporters believe Kelly's more centrist views will appeal to those independent voters.
Our lives can change so quickly.
Kelly's wife, former Congresswoman Gabby Giffords, survived an assassination attempt in 2011, a key reason he's a gun control advocate. Giffords has been busy campaigning for Democrats, which could soon include her husband as a candidate for VP.
My concern is that he's going to open the Senate's position open and make that kind of vulnerable for being taken over by a Republican.
Coming up, will Senator Mark Kelly be the running mate with Kamala Harris? We're sitting down with someone from inside the Kelly camp. This is Before You Vote. Welcome back to Before You Vote. Senator Mark Kelly from Arizona being considered as a vice presidential nominee. Joining us to talk about that is Rod McLoud, who has worked with the senator for quite a while.
Sure.
Let's talk about this what seemed to a lot of us is to come out of the blue. What are the reasons why the senator has been considered and is really at one of the finalists?
Well, I mean, you look at a career in the United States Navy, career in NASA, someone who serves on the Senate Armed Services Committee, has deep experience in national security, has actually served in the South China Sea for the U.S. Navy, a combat veteran, was a captain of the Navy, which is a high rank, higher in the Navy than in the other services. For someone like Vice President Harris, who's been a prosecutor, attorney general, a U.S. senator, someone with that national security experience is very attractive. Also someone who knows how to win a race in a tough swing state like Arizona. Someone who's got experience on the border and has worked in a bipartisan way to try to do a better job on the border. I think those are all things that, make Senator Kelly a very attractive pick.
So for a lot of people, myself included, you look at the border aspect of Arizona, and that does seem like a slam dunk for her, that if she wants help in Arizona, that choice would be good. But how does he help in other swing states? How much of a consideration of all of the swing states does this decision, how much of a role does that play?
Yeah, I think look, both campaigns are trying to figure out how to get to 270 electoral votes. Now, we know California is going to go one way. We know Texas is going to go the other way. This is really a race about trying to figure out Arizona, Nevada, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Georgia, maybe North Carolina. So who are the swing voters in those states, and who are the base voters in those states that you could get excited? I think for the African-American community, for younger voters, voters under 40, obviously we've seen in the last, it's only been 12 days, but it feels like a year already.
It does.
How excited there's just an incredible grassroots energy about Vice President Harris's candidacy. But some of these swing voters, maybe older people with military service, the kind of message that's coming out of Fox News constantly questioning the patriotism of Democrats, all of a sudden, well, now you've got this combat veteran who has really demonstrated his patriotism in a way that's unassailable, that can help.
So when you look at can you give us some insight into the process? For a lot of us, we think, well, maybe they're just waiting to build up suspense to get to an announcement. But there's really a process here, a vetting process and otherwise that they go through. Can you give us some insight into that process?
Sure. I mean, when someone running for president is vetting a vice president, they're trying to get to know that person, their record, just looking at all kinds of votes in Congress or bills they passed in their home state if they were governor, warts and all. What are the knocks on this person? What do they come under attack for? This is a basic process that, the Biden campaign didn't have to worry about because they knew who their nominee, their running mate was going to be. It was going to be the vice president. Well, now that they've had to turn this on. So it's just a bunch of research and candidates getting comfortable with each other.
So when the senator has since the beginning of him being considered, how often do they speak with the nominee? How often does he speak with her and in this process of getting to know each other in the vetting process?
I can't really speak to that. I mean, Senator Kelly has been working for the people of Arizona. He was overseas, I think, in England at a defense conference. He has spent a lot of, as I mentioned, he's on the Senate Armed Services Committee. I mean, he's deeply read into policy dealing with the conflict in Ukraine, the conflict in Israel. He's a very knowledgeable policymaker when it comes to national security matters. And that had been a lot of the focus of his summer before any of this came up. On the political side, he was going around talking to people about why they should elect good senators like Senator Rosen in Nevada, and why they should reelect Joe Biden. So now he's been stumping for Vice President Harris.
Well, I appreciate the insight. It's always good to hear from somebody that's a little bit behind the scenes, so I appreciate this, and I look forward to talking to you again before November.
Sure.
All right, that is a little update on the vice presidential candidacy and who gets nominated. We'll be back here in just a moment. Thank you to Mike Noble and Rod McLoud for joining us this week. We hope you found our conversations around the primary election results insightful. Thank you for joining us this week. We will see you next week right here on Before You Vote.